$29 billion. That's what the United States has spent on a war most Americans weren't fully prepared for. And it's not over. Not even close. Today, inflation hit its highest point in nearly 3 years. Gas is $4.50 a gallon. Prices are rising faster than paychecks, and the man responsible for this conflict isn't at the Pentagon, isn't in the Situation Room. He's boarding a plane to Beijing to sit down with the leader of the country that has been Iran's most powerful ally. What happens in that meeting could determine whether this war ends this year or drags into something far worse. It is Tuesday, May 12th, 2026. And in Washington, in the space of a single morning, the United States just got a very clear snapshot of where it stands. The Labor Department released its April inflation report. Inflation surged to 3.8% in April, its highest level in nearly 3 years, as the war with Iran causes a ripple effect across the economy and energy prices surge. That number isn't just a statistic. Prices are now rising faster than wages, which could exacerbate an affordability crisis already gripping consumers. Gas prices have hit $4.50 a gallon on average, forcing Americans to cut back on purchases of other items. The price of a barrel of oil now stands at $104, down from earlier peaks since the conflict began in late February, but well above where it was trading before the U.S. and Israel began bombing Iran. At the same time, on Capitol Hill, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Joint Chiefs Chair General Dan Caine faced lawmakers over the Pentagon's budget. And in Beijing, the world is waiting for a summit that could reshape the entire strategic landscape of this conflict. If you want fact-based coverage without the noise, subscribe now, because today is one of those days when multiple storylines converge in ways that matter for every single person watching. Let's build the full picture, because today's news isn't one story. It's 4 or 5 stories happening simultaneously, and they are all connected. Start at the Pentagon. The top GOP House appropriators seem dubious of plans to fund the Pentagon's $1.5 billion budget request, as Congress waits to receive a supplemental request for tens of billions of dollars to fund the war in Iran. That already signals friction between the White House and its own party in Congress over the financial mechanics of a war that is now entering its 3rd month. Then came the number that stopped the hearing. In House testimony, the Pentagon's chief financial officer raised his estimate on the cost of the war in Iran so far to $29 billion. $29 billion. And that figure is still climbing. The supplemental funding request, the additional money the Pentagon needs beyond its regular budget to keep the conflict going, hasn't even been formally submitted to Congress yet. Lawmakers are being asked to fund something without being given the full bill. During the hearing, the room didn't stay calm. One of the protesters could be heard yelling that Hegseth was complicit in war crimes in Iran before she was removed by security. That moment, a protester being dragged out while the defense secretary sat at the witness table, captured something real about the political fracture this conflict is creating inside the United States. Meanwhile, on the Senate floor, a parallel decision was being made about the American economy. Kevin Warsh won confirmation to the Federal Reserve Board, with his nomination to be the body's chair still up for a vote. Warsh is Trump's choice to lead the Fed, a pick made partly because the president has been openly pushing for lower interest rates. That has hamstrung the Fed amid Trump's repeated calls for lower rates, and the timing is significant. A new Fed chairman is being installed at precisely the moment inflation is accelerating due to a war the administration chose to enter. Then there's the FDA. Marty Makary, leader of the Food and Drug Administration, is expected to resign on Tuesday amid mounting reports of President Trump's growing dissatisfaction with him. That's a cabinet-level health official potentially walking out the door on the same day the country is absorbing an inflation spike and a $29 billion war cost update. And threading through all of it, Trump himself was not in Washington for any of this. Trump on Tuesday will begin his travel to China, where he will attend a high-stakes meeting with President Xi Jinping. The question that nobody has cleanly answered yet, what exactly is on that agenda? And does America go into that room in a position of strength or a position of need? Here is the part that doesn't get said loudly enough. China is Iran's most important economic partner, and Trump is flying to Beijing to ask Xi for help, while simultaneously fighting a war against China's ally. That's not a clean negotiation. That's a contradiction flying at 35,000 feet. To understand why the Beijing summit matters so much, you have to understand the geometry of this conflict. China and Iran are close allies and trading partners, and there are questions about whether China has assisted Iran. That isn't background noise. That is the central strategic tension of the entire war. The United States has been bombing Iran since late February. China has watched, and Beijing has not issued any serious public call for Iran to stand down. Iran is expected to be a hot topic of discussion between the two leaders when they meet in Beijing. Whether the two presidents can make progress on that subject could be key to how long the conflict lasts, and how much of a shadow it will cast over the global economy in 2026. Read that sentence again slowly. How long the conflict lasts. The assumption baked into that framing is that neither side is close to an exit, and the data supports it. The U.S. and Iran remain far apart on a framework to end the war after Trump called Tehran's latest proposal totally unacceptable. So what does Trump actually want from Xi? Iran, trade between the U.S. and China, and AI are all on the agenda, the administration previewed. Taiwan is also likely to come up, but no change in U.S. policy is expected. Observers expect China to announce additional purchases of soybeans and other agricultural products, and possibly even Boeing airplanes during the trip. Announcing significant purchase agreements has become a trademark of Trump's foreign trips, but these deals often turn out to be less substantial than they initially appear. So there's a real risk this summit produces headlines without substance, photo opportunities, and soybean announcements while the Iran war grinds on and American inflation keeps climbing. What do you think? Can this summit actually move the needle on Iran, or is it primarily about optics? Drop your answer in the comments, because this audience gets this story better than most. Taiwan adds another layer of pressure. China again signaled that Taiwan would be a priority topic ahead of the summit, saying the U.S. must adhere to the One China principle for a stable relationship with Beijing. Earlier this month, China's top diplomat Wang Yi said he hopes the U.S. would make the right choices relating to the self-ruled island when he spoke with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. That language, right choices, is diplomatic code with real teeth. Beijing is arriving at this summit with its own leverage, its own list of demands, and a growing sense that American power in the region is stretched. China has positioned itself as an alternative to the U.S.-dominated international order, building up economic and military relationships throughout Asia and Africa. And the timing of this visit, with the U.S. bogged down in a costly Middle East war, is not lost on Beijing's strategists. Here is what isn't making the front pages today, but probably should be. Trump is flying into this summit with his domestic political standing under serious pressure. It is a moment when Trump's own political standing is in question, with concerns over his health and the GOP facing a potential loss of the House in the midterm elections. That matters at a negotiating table. A president who needs a win on Iran, on the economy, on something, is a president whose leverage is visible. Xi Jinping has been watching American polling data. He knows what Trump needs out of this week, and that changes the dynamic of every conversation they will have in Beijing. Step away from the summit for a moment. Step away from Capitol Hill. Go to a gas station in Omaha, Nebraska, where voters are heading to the polls today for primary elections that could help determine which party controls the House next year. Gas prices have hit $4.50 a gallon on average, forcing Americans to cut back on purchases of other items. That is not an abstraction. That is a family choosing between filling the tank and buying groceries. That is a small business owner recalculating delivery costs. That is a commuter doing the math every morning before they leave the driveway. The inflation number released today, 3.8%, means that prices are now rising faster than wages, eating into Americans' paychecks at a rapid clip. For workers who are just starting to feel ahead of the curve after years of economic turbulence, this is a reversal that feels personal, and the war is the mechanism driving it. Oil is now at $104 a barrel, well above where it was trading before the U.S. and Israel began bombing Iran. Energy costs ripple through everything: food, transportation, manufacturing inputs, utility bills, airline tickets. The battlefield and the checkout line are connected in ways that are hard to fully see until the numbers land like they did this morning. In Nebraska today, voters are making choices that are shaped, whether they fully realize it or not, by a conflict in the Middle East. Today's primary elections in Nebraska will set the stage for November in a battleground House district, as well as a potentially competitive Senate contest, as Democrats try to win control of Congress. The economic pressure from the Iran war is exactly the kind of midterm fuel that flips seats. Senator Pete Ricketts, a former governor and the son of Nebraska billionaire Joe Ricketts, is running for his first full term with the backing of President Trump and the Nebraska Farm Bureau. He faces 4 primary challengers, and his general election path runs through an electorate now paying $4.50 a gallon. In West Virginia, 2-term incumbent Shelley Moore Capito is facing state Senator Tom Willis and 4 other challengers. Capito has received Trump's endorsement. The primaries themselves are a secondary story today, but they are the political nervous system through which all of this ultimately gets processed. Voters in these states are not just choosing candidates. They are, in a real sense, issuing a verdict on the cost of the past several months. And then there's the story from a Los Angeles suburb that didn't make every national headline but carries its own weight. The mayor of the Los Angeles area city of Arcadia has resigned and will plead guilty to illegally acting as an agent of China. Eileen Wang, elected mayor of the city of 56,000 in 2022, appeared in federal court and was released on a $25,000 bond. That arrest, on the same day Trump flies to Beijing, is an uncomfortable data point about the nature of Chinese influence operations on American soil. It's the kind of story that will be referenced in congressional hearings for months. For people watching this from abroad, in Europe, in the Gulf states, in Southeast Asia, what they are seeing is an America managing multiple simultaneous crises while its president boards a plane to the capital of its primary strategic rival. That picture has consequences for how allies and adversaries calculate their next moves. The next 72 hours are going to be revealing in ways that are hard to overstate. If Trump and Xi reach any kind of understanding on Iran, even a vague one, oil prices could move overnight. If they don't, and the conflict continues with no diplomatic off-ramp in sight, inflation will have more room to run. The Federal Reserve, now led by Kevin Warsh, will face pressure to raise rates into an economy already squeezed. And Republicans heading into November will carry both the weight of the war and the weight of the price tag into every competitive district in the country. Watch what comes out of Beijing. Every word of that joint statement, if there is one, will be parsed with extraordinary care. Pull back even further, not just from today's headlines, but from the last several months. Since January, the big events Trump has controlled have mostly centered on foreign affairs: the raid on Venezuela, his threats against Greenland, his welcome for King Charles, and the Iran war. He added a limited Ukraine-Russia ceasefire over the weekend to this tally. That is a presidency defined almost entirely by military and geopolitical action. Domestically, the picture is more complicated. Inflation is climbing. The FDA's leader may be resigning. A new Fed chair was just confirmed, and the party is staring down a midterm environment that increasingly resembles a warning sign. Iran's defiance has deflated the aura of power Trump projected earlier in his term, and the tariffs he wielded have been punctured by court rulings. The leverage that felt overwhelming in January has been tested, and the Beijing summit happens in that context, not as a victory lap, but as a recalibration. Experts say the U.S. and China want to stabilize their relationship. While previous presidents have criticized Xi over human rights and warned him about Taiwan, Trump has focused more publicly on deals and expressed admiration for Xi's power in China. That approach has its own logic and its own risks. Prioritizing the transaction over the principle can deliver short-term announcements while leaving longer structural tensions unresolved. This is just the first of potentially 4 meetings between the two leaders this year, depending on how their talks go. That framing is significant. This week isn't supposed to resolve everything. It's supposed to open a channel. The question is whether that channel is wide enough to carry something meaningful, or whether it becomes a diplomatic facade while the underlying pressures continue to build. Intelligence analysts watching this week are focused on one specific question: will China make any concrete commitment to reduce economic support for Iran? Without that, the war's economic pressure continues. With it, there's at least a path toward an off-ramp. Right now, there is no public signal that Beijing is prepared to move on that. The DOJ charges announced today against the operators of the cargo ship that destroyed the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. 18 charges against the operators of the 100,000-plus-ton cargo ship that crashed into a Maryland bridge more than 2 years ago, causing it to collapse and killing 6 people. Serve as a reminder that Washington is also managing legal, infrastructure, and domestic institutional stories, running parallel to the geopolitical ones. This administration governs in a permanent state of simultaneous crisis management. What to watch over the next week? The outcome of the Beijing summit, the Senate confirmation vote for Warsh as Fed chair, any new developments in the Iran ceasefire negotiations, and the November general election shapes emerging from today's primaries in Nebraska and West Virginia. This story is not resolved. The war continues. The inflation is real. The summit is just beginning. And the political consequences of all three are still being written. We are at a genuinely inflection point moment in this story. A president meeting with the world's second largest power while a war drains billions, and Americans pay for it at the pump every single day. The next moves out of Beijing could change the trajectory of this conflict, the economy, and the midterms all at once. What do you think comes out of that summit? A real deal or a press conference with soybean numbers? Drop your read in the comments. And subscribe, because as this story moves, so does the coverage, and you'll want to be here when the next development breaks.